All right, welcome everyone to an exciting annual tradition here in City Hall. It's Tuesday, March 21st, and we are here just after 3 o'clock in the afternoon for at least a decade and a half we've called Big Rocks. And so in the budget development process every year, we want an opportunity to take a look at kind of where our fund balance is, where our anticipated revenues are, what some big, large, overarching considerations will be regarding expenditures, particularly around questions like compensation and benefits, which are, of course, an enormous part of our general fund expenditures every year. And so that is this opportunity today. So I'm going to turn it over to Manager Williams so he can take you through some of these finer details.
Mayor, before you get started, Commissioner Davenport and Commissioner Wright are going to be running late. I haven't heard from Commissioner Taylor, and Commissioner Hamby asked to be excused.
Okay, appreciate it. Thanks, Commissioner.
Okay. Thank you, Mayor. Thanks, Mayor and Commission, and I'm pleased to be here today at this point in our budget process, and maybe by way of context for our viewing public. The annual budgeting process for Athens-Clarke County really begins in the previous fall. And that is when we ask staff, they begin working on their FY24 budgets, which are due in January. So that's when you have the operating and capital requests from the various departments, constitutional officers, and independently elected officials that comes in January. And then finance staff compiles all that information, and then beginning in January and running through February, as the manager, I meet with all the departments that work under the manager's office to hear their budget request and to spend time with them to better understand that. And then in mid-February, the mayor and Mayor Pro Tem joins me along with hearing from our constitutional officers and independently elected officials about their needs. And as you are aware, we've had the third-party entities, formerly known as independent agencies, that come each year and share what their thoughts and requests are, which is usually towards the end of February. We work up until, and if you'll remember, in January I provided a budget guidelines document to sort of give you a heads up on what we think was coming around the bend as far as revenues and some of our expenditures, just so today wasn't the first time you heard about this coming budget, that you had some sense of what it was seemingly coming together as. The Big Rocks is the point at which the manager proposes a draft budget and it goes to the mayor. But it's a check-in again to kind of bring you into that space on what at least we're seeing at our level. And the mayor changes the budget to his liking, and then he is by our tradition, by the end of April, supposed to share his version of the budget with you. And then in May, there are a series of budget work sessions where the commission really gets in and rolls up its sleeves and starts to give further input. I do applaud the mayor for soliciting your input on the front end. That usually makes for a better back end process. And then at the first voting meeting in June is when you need to go ahead and vote on the budget, and it takes effect July 1st. And then a couple of months after that, we start it all over again. So that's how we get to where we are. And at our retreat, that was another check-in on the budget when we talked about life cycle and some of the other demands at the end of January. At Commissioner Wright's suggestion, which was a good one, we went through the whole Big Rocks illustrative exercise to explain to you that at least at this point in the budget, and really all the way along, if the commissioners want to make a substantive change in direction from what you're about to hear, it really lends itself to some of the bigger pieces of the budget. And I'm going to boil that down for you here in just a minute. And that's why we call it Big Rocks. And I think I've shared with you in the past, I've managed in other community and trying to run through all the invoices from the previous year to flesh out where some savings might be. It's a very intensive process, and so I'm very thankful for our staff, both finance and HR, and all the folks that participate in this and getting us to this point. So with that, I'm going to go ahead. Let me just give you the crib notes or Cliff Notes version of Big Rocks. Okay, we've got about $16.5 million of new revenue. About half of that in this proposed budget is going towards salary and benefits for our existing employees. About a quarter of that is going to bolster operating needs that are dedicated to current services. Okay? So
All right, what was that number you just had the second?
that was about 25% or about $4 million. All right, so let me start over. And y'all, there's a little bit of a round to this, okay? So for anybody watching out there that wants to text real time, those aren't right numbers. I've rounded up a little bit. There are some other things too, but 16.4 million in new revenue, about seven and a half or so going for salary benefits, and I can explain all that. About a quarter for operating increases, about 15% for current service enhancements. Okay, so for so those are, you know, kind of expanding what we're doing, and I think a good case in point, and we'll talk more about it, is the certainly the funds, I think, for the fire department, both in the form of better staffing our ladder trucks to take care of those tall buildings that we talked about not too long ago, as well as new EMS captains to, as we continue to incrementally improve life safety response for the residents of Athens-Clarke County. So 50% salary benefits, 25% for operating increases, about 15% for current service enhancements, and then another 10% for adding on to last year's investment in capital, so another 1.4 million there.
You get a question, Commissioner?
I just had, so when you're, I do know, when you're talking, for example, the ladder for the fire department, so these items, so when you say enhancement, these are some of the continuational or ongoing expenses. This is not a new thought, you know.
Well, in that particular case, I'm going to go through all this in detail. I just want to
Okay.
give you the high level. But with the case of the fire ladder trucks being staffed, if you'll remember, there was a planning case that came before us where the fire chief had, you know, we'd kind of drawn a line on the height of the building. Mm-hmm. And in that, the fire chief let us know, look, we don't even really have the staff to cover the buildings that are already in existence, much less the new ones, which was
Okay.
something that was a new concept to me. We had not really talked about it, but that, just like most things, it brought it to the table, right? And so we think to try and fix that in one budget year is not, well, you're going to put a lot of other things to the side. So what staff has come up with is a thoughtful 3-year plan to get to fully staffing those companies.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Well, and you bring up a good point too, Commissioner Thornton, and I'll talk about this too. One way to kind of hold the line on future costs is not creating a lot of new positions. And so I'll share that with you as well. So I'm moving on. Sorry. I'm operating too. So that was the budget timeline, and this, is, of course, will be available to the public to look at. In the budget guidelines memo that I shared with you earlier, just trying to bring into focus some of the things that we need to pay attention to before we do new things. And that is, of course, employee recruitment and retention. And just like anybody else in America, it's a battle for talent, and we want to be competitive. Current services is something that your constituents have come to depend on. And so we need to make sure that they are fortified, and that includes infrastructure and life cycle needs. You know, people are our biggest expenditure in local government, about 70% of our entire budget, but they need tools to do things. And so that is part of the life cycle, making sure that that equipment is in good service and being replaced and not getting to a crisis point. Of course, state and federal mandates we have no control over. I want to applaud all of you again for your engagement in our strategic plan, and we help use that to help inform us on where to go, and of course any other initiatives and priorities that you have. And we'll talk a little bit about your youth development CDO that you passed in January. All right. So we'll start with expenditures first, and that 50% of new revenue that's going towards comp and benefits, this is where it starts. And what HR has recommended, and I have ensconced in my draft of the budget, is a 4% pay increase. And let me also say this too, this is meant by no means to preempt the commission's decisions, because ultimately it's your decision on what this budget looks like. This is just a starting point, okay? And our department directors know, and I want our employees to know, that you may have to change this, okay, because of some initiative that you want to pursue, and that is part of the timing of the process, and that is totally fine. So this is not meant to say this is what the salary is going to be. It could change, and I ask anybody listening to please observe that and give the commission the grace to be able to make the decisions they have to. So a 4% market increase, and then a 1% pay table, I'm sorry, a 3% pay table increase, and then 1% for merit pay. So what does all that mean? So the 4% is for all employees who are in their position as of January 1st, okay?
Of this year.
Of this year, of the current year. And then an additional 1%, this will be the last year that we use, and Commissioner Wright will be glad to hear this, our paper performance system. We're going to PERPRO, which organizational development is spearheading, which is much more dynamic than, and I know when I look at the bottom of the evaluation I was filling out last night for one of my direct reports of 2007, this will be a huge improvement for us next year. And so at least in this last year of this performance, we want to have a 1% in there. Now, the pay table is interesting. The way that works is the 3% pay table is not a big cost figure, but it's very important because what we're doing is elevating the pay table for people that aren't here. So all minimums are getting a boost because we're moving everything up. And the reason why that needs to lag the market increase is just if you had a 5% pay table adjustment lifting up the minimums and you only gave a 4% to somebody who's in the minimum, then the new people are coming in ahead of them, if that makes sense. So the pay table is important as what we consider to be compensation maintenance.
Blaine, the PowerPoint here says the pay performance is averaging an additional 1%.
Yes.
So averaging, does that mean that people who recommendations can be in a 0 to 3% range, or what's the range that's allowable?
So the way that works is that each department director, well, each supervisor reviews their employees using the tool we currently use. And they don't suggest what the actual percentage increase is for that individual employee, but there is a rating score based on 10 criteria that had been previously discussed with that employee by the supervisor. And so, as you can imagine, people in a department, there are going to be different scores. There are going to be some folks higher, some folks lower. If you don't score at least a 3.0, which is what is considered fully meets on that Likert scale, then you do not get an increase. That's generally not many folks, quite frankly. And then of the ones that go from 5 is the top you can get, a lot of folks end up in that 3 range of fully meeting, and then superior is above that. And at the end of that, HR has an equation, if you will, that distributes that 1% of that payroll that went to that department amongst the employees based on their score.
Okay. So it's per department, so that if there's variation depending on how the supervisor rates, it's
Exactly.
not affected from department to department.
Yes, we see that, where some are naturally higher raters than others, but you're just distributing it within your own employee population, and it doesn't
Okay.
come at the expense of another department that might be a lower rater.
So does that increase their annual salary, or is it a one? Okay.
Yes. So it doesn't go for the position increase, it goes for the person increase. So John Culpepper, based on the merits of their performance, receives X amount of dollars that is forever in your salary until you terminate.
So it automatically renews the following year. They don't have, if they didn't perform as well, do they have a 1% reduction or whatever that is reduction?
There's no reductions.
Okay.
At the worst, you would receive nothing. And again, that's a very small handful of folks. And it's, and it's not, let's just say that $500 was added to your salary. Well, that $500 will be there until you leave, but it doesn't compound. You're back to next year with the next review, however you did compared to others.
Two quick questions. One, the 3% for the public safety step plan,
I
that
was
is
about to get to
3%
that.
on top of the increase to the sheriff's positions that we've already approved? Like, will that 3% be applied to those new salaries in the sheriff's office?
Yes.
Okay. And the other
Yeah,
question is,
just to answer that question, so the extra $400,000 that is part of the public safety pay plan for the sheriff's office, that's being implemented in this very next pay period. And so whatever percentage y'all ultimately decide that happens in the first or second payroll in July
will happen.
would be on top of what they have.
Okay.
So what was the percentage difference between the sheriff and the police after we did the increase? Because it shrunk it to what, $6,500 or something like that, difference?
I believe, I'd have to go back
So
and look.
in real dollar terms, prior to our recent action, starting deputy earned about 42,000, and a starting patrol officer earned about 50,000. I mean, I'm off by a couple $100, but only a couple hundred. Now it's more like 45,000 and 50,000. So it was an 8% pay raise that starting sheriff's deputies
But
received.
the sheriff's getting a pay raise, but so is the police, so the difference is still the same.
Yeah.
No, it'll close a little bit because we're moving up we're closing the gap, and then they both, well, it's a little bit different too, y'all, because in the public safety pay plan, you've got well, if I could go ahead and talk about
Yeah,
that.
I'm sorry.
No, it's fine. So,
May I ask just one more question about the previous section?
sure.
The 3% to the pay table. So we have these 7 tiers of positions that are raised up to 1560 currently. Are we applying 3% to 1560, or are we applying 3% to those positions that are currently structured at under 1560?
Positions structured under 1560.
Okay.
No, I'm asking, I don't know what you're saying.
So my understanding is that the existing pay structure that we have still has 7 tiers of positions
Yes.
that call for a wage or a salary that's under the equivalent of a wage of $15.60 an hour. But we're currently bringing everyone in at $15.60. So is the 3% to the pay table going to be applied to $15.60 for all 7 of those tiers, or to that number underneath, and therefore those positions will still come in at $15.60?
My understanding it's 3% for all positions, but let's see. HR's not here.
Which I guess like the short version is, do we need to do the same thing we've done the last 2 years and inject something that says bring up those positions to 1607 if we want the 3% to apply, or is
Well,
it going to apply already?
I'll talk to HR, but I would greatly suggest that y'all not do any more interventions in the pay and class plan, because it causes consequences we've yet to deal with. So I think the 3% pay table increases all positions minimums by 3%, so it lifts the entire structure up.
I understand that.
But I
when you say
understand your question,
positions-
Jesse.
Yeah.
So now, currently, if somebody enters one of those positions, say camp counselor, that's a position where they would make $15.60 in FY23, and what you're asking is in FY24, would they make more than $15.60 because what was approved by the commission is now part of that structure?
Yes. And, the structure hasn't adjusted yet to,
Well,
structurally define
understanding
the
it-
positions as,
I thought I answered that in that all positions will go up 3%. And then, so they're all moving up 3%, where it ripples through the entire pay table, and you're not just elevating some people and not all by that equal amount.
I think I can ask a question, and maybe to clarify this for myself and see if it's the same. 2 different things. You're already employed, and you're getting $15.60. even though you're in position level 3, which officially hasn't moved up to 1560, but we're paying 1560 or whatever it is. So I've been here since last year. I'm going to get my 3% raise, right?
4%.
Well, plus the 1. Well, if I've been a good employee, I'm going to get my 3%.
It's 4% for market increase.
Oh, 4, sorry, yeah, okay, I'm looking the wrong. 4%, I'm going to get my 4% raise, right?
Yes.
So, okay. And
So
then,
if I'm making 1560, even though that position is defined in the structure as under 1560, the actual
Yeah.
person making 1560 will get the 4% applied to that 1560.
All
they're making.
employees on the unified plan will get 4% if you approve it this way.
right. And then if you're coming on that pay plan, right? So on that pay plan, we're raising that 3% in there. And according to my understanding of Jesse's explanation, there are positions that are still on that pay plan that might be at 14, making this up. You're going to add the 3% to that, and that's going to go up with everything else, right? But what happened, are we going to hire someone? We're not hiring someone at 1450. We're always hiring people at 1560. Is that correct?
So for every person that is on the unified plan, if you approve this, they will get a 4% raise.
Right, I got that.
And then for every position, so they're going to be elevated 4, and then every position minimum goes up, in the unified plan goes up 3%. So if whoever's hired after that adjustment's made will theoretically be making 3% more than they would today.
And I guess to make sure that I'm understanding both of these presentations, are there positions now, if I'm hired now, what is the lowest I can get paid?
I don't know. I'd have to
Okay,
look
is
at
it,
it.
for some of those positions, might it be under 1516?
I'm not sure.
Okay, that's what I just need to understand.
Okay.
So
In
I,
last year's budget, we specified that if you get hired, the lowest you're going to get paid is 1560. And that's the lowest anyone's been hired at.
I've never said anything different. The first I heard of under 1560 is when Commissioner Hull just said that.
no, I think it's just in this pay table, that's theoretical pay table that exists. Like, I don't know if that's just that's there, but the reality is that everyone's getting paid this.
So, go ahead.
I think we understand the question. You're wondering if the pay table shift
The base, right, the floor
We'll
wage,
get you
right.
an answer.
Yeah, that's good. That's all we got to do right now.
Okay,
Can I interject something?
sure.
In all due respect to you, Manager Williams, I think we do need to look at our pay plan, though. My concern is, and you all have heard me voice this, that retaining employees, I think we handicap our directors, our constitutional officers. For example, if I go out somewhere for the same position, another county have offered me more money, and I come back and say, can you match that? We can't match those salaries. And again, I think they handicap us for retaining and also when we bring in new talent. Again, and I get it, I truly get it. When you bring people in, you don't want them to jump other folks. I mean, and I've been doing this for years. But I think for us to get good people and to retain good people, we really need to take a look at our pay, how we do our pay. And again, that's one man's opinion.
Well,
Commissioner, what would be your alternate approach?
I think to give the department some autonomy, especially with our constitutional office and our elected officials, give them autonomy. If one of their employees go out and get an offer from another county, same position. I'm not talking about promotion. I get that. If you're going to leave, go for a promotion. But if you're going to another county, they offer you a position, and it's $2,000 or $3,000, or maybe let's say $5,000 more. They come back to their boss. I mean, we can't. The way the system is now, we can't match that.
yes, sir, I can address that too. If you were to give department directors and constitutional officers the autonomy to offer whatever salary they wanted to meet a demand, then very quickly you would be subject to claims from other employees.
And I get it, but that's anywhere. I mean, I understand. I'm willing, you know, and again, I'm just one person, you know, and we got 9 other people who have an opinion of this. I'm willing for us to do that, though, because I think, you know, we shortchange ourselves. If we let talent go and we can't recruit talent and not giving them the autonomy to make those decisions. And again, it has to be within their budget. They can do that. But I think we should not handicap our folks now in your position because you control your folks. But when we're looking at and I wish we can do this across the board, and I wish we would, but when we should give those departments the autonomy to either try to recruit somebody in or try to retain an employee if they're going to leave. And I understand the ripple effect, but that's how business works. That's how the economy works. When you're trying to retain talent and when you're trying to get talent.
Well, I worked in a private company where I didn't know what the folks around me made.
Right.
Public employees know each other make.
Oh, I get
And
that.
Our whole, and listen, it's your prerogative to change the system however you want to. But if you get rid of internal equity in the system, the only way to really fix it is to rectify it at some point in the future. And when you do that, like, let's say, for instance, just the sheriff's deputies, out of everybody in the entire, just to give them that 8% bump was $400,000. We still don't know the impacts of trying to ripple through the 1560 all the way through. We kind of compartmentalized it to folks that are making, you know, under $20 an hour. And we hope to, as I'm going to say in this new upcoming pay study, start to get to that. I mean, that, again, that's up to y'all. We have this system is not unique to Athens-Clarke County. Commissioner, you mentioned that other people do different things. Typically, governments do have a synthesis of both external equity and internal equity. So that's I think. I know that HR would advocate that, and
Okay, well, again, I just sort of disagree because, you know, we want to bring in the best and the brightest, and we're gonna do that and be the type of government in the city we want to be. We you know, we're gonna have to do some things differently, and I totally understand about the equities and how pay should be, and it's gonna rub some people wrong. I dealt with it a lot of times at UGA. I done it, you know. But if I'm trying to recruit talent or retain talent, you know. But again, I always say within the budget that particular department have. You know, I'm not asking for us to throw a lot of money, but if a constitutional officer or elected official has the money in their budget to bring somebody in at a rate that they think they need this person based on their experience and they got the talent, we shouldn't handicap them. That's all I'm saying.
no, I agree with you, and I would appreciate not being handicapped as well. But
Yeah,
it's going to come with consequences.
I understand. That's why, but you know, like I say, you know, you as the manager, you control your departments. But and if you want to do that, I would support that too. I would support it across the board. To be honest. But I would truly, if we can do it countywide, again, if we recruit talent or if we trying to retain talent, then we need to look at that.
I agree. But the other thing is, all positions in the county are subject to the personnel system. I think, Attorney Drake, did we determine that?
The compensation plan, they're not all in the personnel system, but they are all subject to the compensation plan, which is part of the personnel system.
So if that handicap us, so you say that handicap us there?
That handicaps.
Yeah,
us
if the
there.
sheriff, for instance, wants to be able to name his salaries, his positions are part of the personnel
That last
system.
memo I just sent goes into that. If you
With
read
the,
it, it
judges.
talks about that,
Yeah.
yeah. But I went into that because I thought it was important as part of that discussion, because that's what we were up against there.
Mm-hmm.
And it talks about, I'll give you an example, the case for the tax commissioner in Fulton County,
Yeah.
who was not in the personnel system, but Fulton County had always placed all its employees in the compensation plan. And so in that situation, the exact same thing happened. Fulton County's tax commissioner gave a raise to a person who was not in the personnel system, that was outside the compensation plan. And employees who were in the personnel system sued, and they ended up getting a raise up to that same level. That case is very, very on point about what we're talking about right now.
I just have a quick comment on that. I mean, I think on a bigger level, what Commissioner Fisher is bringing up is the challenges that we have with hiring and the 25% vacancy rate. And if what we were presented with back in the fall about changes in demographics and employment are such, it behooves us to not, I'm not saying to do this right now, to sort of be looking at ways entities are thinking outside of the box or in new directions in terms of hiring and such. Now, I don't know if that's the best answer, and it's not, definitely not a short-term thing, but the labor market being that is how are we going to, and I know you all are thinking of that, what are we going to do differently for this new world that we're in, and to think about it that way. Like on that one though, I'm just humorously thinking about that. If that had been me in the situation being a state employee where there was never an option that I could do that, but now I'm like, oh man, then I can go apply for all these jobs and come back, and how would we decide? There's so many complicated things on that. Like if I could go to Gwinnett and apply for a job there and then come back and say, hey, Athens Tech, like, I got this other thing, you're gonna meet me on it. Like, that would have changed my way of looking at professional development. It might be a good thing in the end, but
Yeah. Well,
not a short-term solution.
In my career, we did that.
Yeah.
And it's still going on. And same thing at school district, the same thing. We want to retain teachers,
Okay,
principals, same thing. So again, if we're going to be competitive, and if we want to be the community and, the type of talent that we need, like we got to think outside the box. Again, I know this is not going to happen overnight. But I think moving forward is, if I'm blessed to be here the next 3 years, I'm gonna push forward.
Certainly one of the things that you see a lot of public sector cities and counties doing, and other governmental entities too, is looking at other post-employment benefits rather than just a defined benefit program like all of our full-time employees are in. So that may be something that is, a pretty clear opportunity that others are taking advantage of that we may want to spend some time talking about in the next couple of years, given that I saw data just a couple of months ago that the typical undergraduate departing with that bachelor's degree today is going to have something like 13 positions over the course of that individual's career. And so that may mean that a tenured opportunity like those that get you into the defined benefit program isn't what employees are going to have. So there are other opportunities outside
right.
of wage scale that I think we can look at, given this new dynamic.
Well,
Are you talking about the benefits as whole, like the health benefits, or are you talking about further down the, like when they,
Particularly for the defined compensation, post-retirement benefits.
okay. When that might be cheaper to increase benefits, the benefit package that we're offering new employees to help recruit versus raising the pay raise.
yes, but it's not as visible, I guess, when people are deciding to go somewhere, maybe a quarter more an hour down the road. But it is important. I think once folks begin to really understand the value of that.
Well, and that's what I was asked a couple of weeks ago, is do we put a dollar value on that? Because when I'm hiring somebody, I'll say, look, your salary is X, and I'm going to provide 95% of your benefits, which is another $9,500 a year. So putting that dollar value on it when they see that, because all they're looking at is the salary. They're not looking at anything under that. But if you explain that to them when you're recruiting them, it makes a huge difference.
Well, I know for the existing employees, we do send out a letter once a year that kind of summarizes, especially after the whatever increases take effect, if any, that says, this is how much you make in salary, here's your benefits that you receive, and to try and reinforce that very point. Well, I would say that I really appreciate the will of this commission and past commissions to support our employees. Two of the most equitable ways to do that is either through this particular number, where you can choose how much to increase the market, or, and in this draft budget is some funds to revisit the pay study for the non-public safety employees. And here's why. It's been about 5 years. 2018, when we did the last pay study, and that was the first time in 25 years or so, And we said at the time, every 5 years, we should revisit this, you know. So some of what we're suggesting here, the 4% increase, you know, we've read different articles about what inflation looks like, and it's 7 to 8%. You know, it's that rolling 12 months changes every month. But this is what Human Resources is recommending, and I agree. If you choose to fund the pay study in this coming year, the very first question that the consultant's going to ask you is, do you want us to bring to you recommendations that put your employees above market, at market, or below market? The last time we did this, we just said, just bring it at market, because we didn't know after 25 years how far we'd be off. And you can imagine the impact to morale if the number was something that we couldn't bite off, you know. So contrary to what anybody believes, there was no numbers given to the consultant. This is where it needs to work out. We just went in with knowing that this needed to be dealt with, and then we didn't know what it was. So certainly, if you choose to fund that pay study next year, that question will come up, and that'll be something that we need to be prepared to answer.
You said if it comes up next year.
If you approve the money for a pay study.
Okay.
If you don't, then it won't come up.
Oh, okay.
Okay, y'all ready to move on?
Is that a recommendation then?
Yeah, it's.
Yes,
Okay, okay.
and that's later in the presentation. On the benefit side, employee health, retiree health, and pension fund all require some increases. So this is part of that 50% of revenue I was telling you about, compensation and benefits. So there's another $2 million right there for, these are just ongoing annual costs. In a little while, I'll show you where we want to fortify some of those fund balances with some one-time fund balance. And with respect to comp and benefits, plain today that this is something at the top of your minds. And in about 3 weeks at the April work session, we're going to have a full work session presentation, and it's not going to be 10 minutes, I can tell you. Sorry, because it's pretty involved. But y'all can talk with our staff and the consultants, and you know, any questions you have in advance, please let us know. Now, one thing on this particular sheet, the smaller text in the middle is important. The note of budgeting for pay. So for the first time last year, what we were invariably doing is budgeting for all full-time positions filled 365 days a year, which that was never really the case. We always have some fluctuation in vacancies. But what that would do would cause us to over budget for payroll, anticipate big deficits at the end of the year, which never came to be because we always had salary savings. And so we began to transition away from that by at first having a $2 million vacancy adjustment or so, and then finally what we've done, because we're in a new time right now, I hope it'll change with these historic vacancies, is we basically budget to our filled positions and then have a little bit extra in there, and in this case I think it's $750,000 for next year if we start to ramp up. And of course what you can expect in local government, of course I don't know what to expect anymore, but in the past when the economy went down, we tended to see our employment levels because, to your point, Commissioner Culpepper, the benefits are generally better in the public sector, and so people would gravitate towards that. So I say all that to say that the way we used to budget would provide us a pretty sizable surplus at the end of any given year because we didn't have all those positions filled. That's no longer the case now. We're budgeting a lot closer to the bone, and so the surpluses that you'll see being used later to help catch up on life cycle will probably not be there in the future. Okay, with expenditures, I mentioned life cycle. We've got a number of facility, fleet, parks needs that have been deferred or delayed or in competition with many other worthy SPLOST or T-SPLOST projects were underfunded from the request. And so if you don't have T-SPLOST and SPLOST to pay for it from a revenue perspective, and you don't have a separate user fee dedicated towards it, then your only remaining choices are grants, debt, or general fund dollars. And so what we're doing here is playing a little catch-up with the general fund dollars.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
Do we have a percentage of what is requested versus, from T-SPLOST to SPLOST versus what is actually given? I mean, I'm just curious about, we're gonna have to fund things that we didn't put money for, but we put money in other things with the SPLOST, and do we need to evaluate, I know we can't take stuff away from projects, but do we need to evaluate putting things in these capital maintenance, these capital projects instead?
Well, the next opportunity will really be the next T-SPLOST and SPLOST, because when the voters, they vote on that referendum, it kind of locks it in as far as what the projects are and what the amounts that are allocated to them.
But we can show you what was requested ahead of commission confirmation and then the voters' approval of it.
Yeah, we can certainly show you that difference. Well, one thing that we're working on as well, if you'll remember at the January work session or retreat, I spent a little time with you on life cycle and showed you kind of a blunt instrument that I developed, and finance is going to help steer the ship as far as helping define life cycle cost. Some jurisdictions have their life cycle and capital budgets tightly tied. We don't at this point, and I'm not saying we're going to get there next year at all. But I am concerned about the fact that we don't fully know our life cycle liability for the current services we provide. And so we are working on that. I make that point to tell you that in the capital budget, departments and offices requested $26 million. Now remember, we only got 16 in new revenue, and that is not even very reflective of our life cycle, I would tell you. This coming year, we probably, my recommended budget has us more towards 12 to 13 million. That seems like a lot. In previous years, we only really funded around 5.5, but we've been inching that up, and we were north of 10 million last year. And that involves the use of a good bit of one-time funding, and I'll share that with you. Fleet replacement funding, we've got a backlog of about 12 million on that, and if you'll remember, when we have a big financial problem to deal with, we try and phase it in over several years. You might remember last year that Fleet gave a presentation that said, okay, well, to right the ship because of a decade of underfunding due to the economy, we were going to take a 10-year period of time to ramp up and get there. Yes, sir.
So other municipalities, I may have misheard you, other municipalities have a life cycle balance every year, or we don't? You elaborate on that a little
Yes.
bit more?
No, I'm not sure many jurisdictions have a handle on their life cycle. Now, it is not a foreign idea. If you go to the Government Finance Officers Association, they have a chapter on life cycle. I'm aware of a jurisdiction in particular because it came up during our conversations who's done a pretty good job of that. I would tell you that I think we do a better job than most at least attempting to get towards our life cycle needs. A lot's been said about stormwater. We're getting a handle on that. You'll be coming later in the summer with that level of service discussion on how to fund what the current needs are. Certainly on our water and sewer enterprise fund, I think we're way ahead. They've been talking the last 10 years about the infrastructure crisis that is facing this country. Flint, Michigan was one variant of that. Jackson, Mississippi, most recently in the news. I used to work at a regional government that dealt with a lot of the smaller rural areas, and quite frankly, as costs go up and things get older, your rates should go up to provide the funds to deal with that. But politically, that's a hard thing to do a lot of times, to raise fees and taxes on the constituents who vote you into office. And so a lot of jurisdictions have deferred on their maintenance to a much greater degree than we have. But, we're seeking alignment with the assets that we have and replacing them at a responsible rate, and to not get too far ahead of funding other things and then find ourselves in a big jam at some point in the future. That's part of, I think, our duty to future generations.
Go ahead, Pat.
Is it possible that we can incorporate slowly. To like fleet management, code enforcement, police, they don't have an enterprise fund, so they're not generating funds to replace their life cycle. Would it be, I'm not a big budget guy, but would it be hard for our finance department to incorporate a life cycle program for each department or something like that, or holistically as a whole?
No, sir, that's the holy grail.
Okay.
It's going to take us a while to get there, and the way that, after talking with finance, they're proposing is that we pilot several of our biggest life cycle departments, so central services, leisure services, transportation, and public works. We're going to model those three. That should take care of a good bit of it. I will also say, both in the operating and the capital budgets, the life cycle refrain started as early as 2016 when I took over as manager, and we started putting in line items for small things. You know, there's a definition for capital. I think it's above $20,000, or is it 30? 30. It's above $30,000, but there's all sorts of things, equipment that our folks use that need to be replaced. And so we're to answer your question, Commissioner, we're trying to build it in as we recognize it as much as we can, but we do need a more holistic analysis of it.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
That's what I was gonna say. Can we, I mean, really, before we can vote on things, I think we need an amortized schedule of the life cycle stuff and where we, you know, is it gonna take us 10 years? How long is it gonna take us if we earmark this amount every year? Because it's great that we've got a $16.5 million increase, but if we can't keep up with our equipment to be able to provide the services, we're never gonna catch up. So you're saying, when you said a life cycle refrain started in 2016, that was when they started pulling life cycle cost out of the budget?
Well, that was about, this is a particular interest to me. And when I became manager, began to try and work with a couple of our, I call them super user departments, to help identify what their life cycle liability is, if you will. And that went along for, you know, since that time, and the spreadsheet that I showed you at the retreat is sort of the latest manifestation of that. But it really needs to be advanced, and it's more than I can do as a person, and so I've asked finance to assist with that.
But is that a process that's gonna take a while?
Yes, yes. But let me say this too. We're not in imminent danger of crisis. You've heard complaints, no doubt, about our vehicles, and part of that's due to the supply chain logistics and just a long lead time on some vehicles. We're not at a crisis stage, and I don't want to give you that impression, because we have been planning ahead, but we just don't know exactly what the figure is. And I think if we do work towards that, and I'm able to give you as the decision makers what that list looks like, then you can make more informed decisions at the next T-SPLOST or the next SPLOST. When you have other revenue opportunities that come up, you can say, okay, and stormwater is going to be the first one in front of you all this summer.
So,
And they have done a pretty good job of trying to figure out, at least with the live stream replacement, what some of our immediate life cycle needs are there, I think to the order of 20+ million.
so when we're looking at the 25% operating expenses, 15 current enhancement services, 10% investment capital, is any of this life cycle stuff in those numbers?
Some of the capital is related to life cycle, yes. For instance, the pavement. There's a pavement line item under TPW under current services that's used. Their request this year was $3 million. And it was used to augment both the LMIG funds we get from GDOT plus the T-SPLOST funds that y'all voted in to give us the approximately $8 million for this year's calendar year paving program. So that $3 million ask is in the $26 million. You know, you mentioned the distinction, Commissioner Davenport, between general fund and enterprise fund. That $26 million that we're talking about is only for general fund. The other, you know, transit, public utilities, airport, all of those are outside the general fund. So a lot to talk about there, and I appreciate your interest in it because I share that. All right, stabilizing other funds. So basically, finance told me we had about $13 million of fund balance that we could use, one-time funds. And I believe in the budget.
How many, I'm sorry?
13 million. So that 13 million is prior year fund balance. So this is beyond, so at a minimum, y'all, we keep 2 months worth of operating. That's our, that's a best practice recommended by GFOA, and the commission ratified that a couple years ago. So that 2 months operating fund balance is set aside, rainy day if you want to call it. And then the unassigned fund balance that's left over from some of our previous years. And remember what I just said, that was when we were budgeting for all full-time positions. So that was some easy surplus that we gained that won't be there in the future. But what finance tells me is that we have 13 million available that we could use. And so the budget that I presented to you has about $11 million worth of that used. 7 or 8 million goes towards fleet, facilities, leisure services, paving, and then some of this other, the 2 million, we want to prop up some of the fund balances that we've had to spend down. So OPEB, Mayor mentioned earlier, our employee health insurance fund due to high claims has eroded our fund balance. And with the transit fund, if you'll remember, the state was late in giving us the $7 million for the ARPA grant for transit. And so we had expected that back as early as October. So we didn't have the funds to operate the transit, so we had to burn up the fund balance or working capital. And once we get the grant, it's reimbursement only, so you can't, so we're going to have to build back that transit fund as well. And then the final point, particularly for the new commissioners, when we first got ARPA, the commission had many things that it wanted to do at that particular budget year. And so it voted to use 2.2 million of ARPA funds to help balance the budget the very first year that we got it. And what staff advised was, if you're just doing that for this year and you're creating new things, then this time next year, if there's no ARPA funding, then the first 2.2 million in new revenue has to fill that hole. And what the commission agreed to was that we would sort of eventually wean ourselves off the ARPA funds. So every year at the budget, we're reducing it a little bit, till we get to zero dependence on ARPA for balancing the budget. Yes.
Blaine, just a quick refresher here for me on these bigger numbers. The 16.4 million that of new money in the general fund, you probably said this already, but is that from increased tax revenue that is separate from the 13 million that's left over in the fund balance, or is that?
16, and I'm gonna do revenues next,
Yeah,
but the 16 million is separate from the 13 million.
okay, that's,
So there's theoretically $27 million of available funding, but 13 of it is one-time funding, so we would recommend a best practice to apply that to one-time cost if you can, as opposed to creating a new program that you'll have to
Right.
find funding for the next year.
but then is the 50%, 20, when you gave us that breakdown, 50%, 25%, 15, 10, is that going to all of it, or does that just for the,
Just the 16 million of
Okay.
new general fund revenue.
got it, thank you.
Okay, well, here are some specifics, if you will, of some of the expenditures, just to give you a sense of some of the things that are in there. And I am recommending $100,000 towards the Real-Time Crime Center initiative that the police have advanced.
Page are we on? Did you skip a
I might have.
page, the major,
I
the
did.
one that starts with
Sorry.
medical services?
Yep, let me
Okay,
go back to
okay.
that. And so, last month, y'all approved the increase in the jail medical contract, so 2.1 million, and just if you're keeping score, that was part of the 25% of the 16 million that goes towards, operating increases for current services. The general and vehicle liability, we've had an $800,000 increase towards increased premiums and trends. The iCloud storage, I really give a ton of credit to our IT department and Travis Cooper for helping to move us into the 21st century. And they continue to find ways to help get off some of these legacy servers that we're on and move towards more redundancy. Fleet replacement. Oh, yes, go ahead.
So every year, general and vehicle liability, so that's not health.
No, sir, that's just insurance premiums for all the liability insurance for the government plus the vehicles. But every year it doesn't increase by 800,000. This is the most it's increased in quite a while.
So, and I'm not the insurance guru, self-funded versus group. Can we, I think we had a work session on that.
Now,
After we go back and look at that.
We are not self-funded when it comes to our general liability.
Okay.
That's through a third-party insurance carrier. And when we had, if you remember, around First AME, we had the folks from GMA, GERMA, and Lockton, who's their broker. That's who we work through for those premiums.
Okay.
All right. I mentioned fleet replacement. $200,000 increase in the annual contribution. You know, a couple things going there. So we have a number of vehicles that we need to replace, but now they're getting more expensive. And so we're trying to play catch up and make sure that we can buy what we need to there. Electricity for street lights. So this is somewhere around $1 million a year if you didn't know. And historically, every year, Public Works says we need to fully fund our street light. And in the past, I've always said, well, you're going to have salary savings, so don't sweat it. But now we don't have salary savings anymore. So some of this operating that you're seeing funded is kind of closing the gap on some historically underfunded operating costs, knowing that we were going to have surplus. You can see how we're trying to fix that system.
Blaine, on that electricity for the streetlights, have we explored, again, do not know specifics of this, but the using solar for is there any, exploration of that topic? What's going on in public facilities for streetlights and solar-powered ones? Do you know anything? Is there anything in that area that is not one of my areas?
Well,
If that's a big expense and a big use of power, could that be something that we eventually look into using, obviously with our 100% clean and renewable commitment?
Yes, everything's on the table.
Yeah.
And if you didn't know, our streetlights are, most of them are Georgia Power, and then we also
right.
have the EMCs, and then we have a few that are our own. I think the ones that went in on Clayton are ours. Now, what little I know about that is anecdotal and has to do with the park and ride. And those
Right, I remember that.
were
Very
put
expensive.
in. Well, and then the batteries had to be replaced, and I'm not sure anybody was ready for that. So we need to do a thoughtful analysis of those.
Yeah, because that also was, all that technology's changed so rapidly. So that park and ride, for some of us, it seems like it was just put in yesterday. But I seem to have passed that for decades on my drive home, and it was always empty. So it's obviously been around for a while. So something to look into.
So on the page before, fleet replacement funding, projected to be $3 million, and then we're saying 200,000 increase. So is that the $3 million is a 200,000 increase over last year? Is that what we're saying?
Yes. Well, okay.
Is that two different?
Well, no. Okay, thank you for the question, and I totally get it. In that I have not adequately explained this. So all of these increases that you're seeing are in addition to FY23 funding levels. So we're not starting at zero, but we're saying we're taking last year's budget, and with
200
few
to it.
exceptions, we're adding to it.
Okay, I was about to say $200,000. How many cars? If that's all we're spending.
Good with that? Yep. Okay. And I would be glad to have Fleet update their 10-year projections based on the funding levels that are suggested here, so it makes more sense instead of just seeing it one data point at a time.
On the, which one are we on now? Okay. Got it.
Okay, we good? I think I had gotten to City Hall safety, and I know the mayor can speak to this as well. But we've had some situations here in City Hall that I think for people's safety, we're going to require some type of either physical improvements or operational changes, and I've funded a certain amount for that.
Oh, are we talking about like metal detectors? Are we talking about security, added security?
A security guard.
Okay.
Because right now, nothing prevents anyone from walking off the street and going straight into somebody's office. If you go to the school district, you've got a door to be buzzed in.
Yeah.
Retrofitting this building, it'd be an expensive proposition. So we're looking at all alternatives. This is really just a placeholder. I don't know if you-
Yeah, no, I mean, as it happens, the last few years, I've been in this building full-time, coming up on 4.5 years. Unfortunately, as is the case in any public facility, there's lots of coming and going, and sometimes that needs to be well monitored for the safety of everybody who are in their offices, and it's not unusual for some folks in this building to be, relatively alone in their office. And so, I mean, as manager noted, you go to any peer institution, when I go to the City Hall in Macon or in Savannah, those are spaces that are somewhat more controlled in terms of access to a front door, sitting in a lobby,
Yeah,
speaking through an intercom and the like, so.
oh, totally.
So if we fund this, is there gonna be like a follow-up work session or something on what the plan actually is? Or how things around here are
Well,
gonna change, or?
the 62.4 is a very exact number, and that's based on if we just hired a security guard just to be somebody here to respond in case we had a situation. And we've had situations that our staff have had to respond to.
So that's just basically a salary for a person. This doesn't implicate changes to the doors or anything like that.
We are investigating that, though, to see if there's a good way to do that. It could be, and again, I don't mean to pick on the school district, but it's the first one that comes to mind. There's a person who sits up front, and you check in, and that person announces your arrival in the back, and then you're buzzed in, and that's just a more controlled way, I guess, to ensure that folks have safety, certainly not to exclude anybody.
And and just to follow up, and I mentioned this to the mayor, we are here a lot, and one of my recommendations also would be to have, I know when we have regular meetings, we have one of our officers here, but I think anytime that we're present in this space, we need to have an officer here, if we can afford it, have an officer here, regardless, during a work session, or whether we do in this chamber, we need to have somebody present.
Agreed.
So we will have a work session, potentially.
We can. Now, what I would say,
Okay. Or email or. My train of thought, like, there are some people who may want to come in to rest, who want to get some water, who want to just lay their head down for a minute. I would hate to stop them from coming in, when it's 99 degrees out or negative 99 degrees out. But can we get a budget for what Macon has when it comes to the buzz or what school board has?
well,
Add that, or
and I agree with you because City Hall is the public's house.
Yeah.
And if you just think about the layout of the building, if you wanted to give the public access to bathrooms and water, then you're starting to put doors on the stairwells, which is difficult. And so that's why we went ahead and just put in a security guard, because that's going to be the easiest way. Now, from a long-term perspective, probably the most costliest way. And so maybe there's a better way to deal with that.
Is this security guard just a police department employee that's spending time here that we're budgeting for, or is this like hiring a private contractor?
I think Chief would agree with me that we need every one of those officers in the field. And so, and because we're running a vacancy rate, it's improving, but slowly, that we would hire a third-party security outfit to do that for us.
so this is just baby steps.
It's just baby steps, that's right.
But we can outline some options, I think, over email in
And
the
that-
weeks ahead.
That's what I was going to say. From a security perspective, I don't know if that's a big public discussion or we just make some changes that, are safe. And we will let you all know about it.
I've been quiet, but I do think that we do need to take security seriously, and not to discourage anybody coming from the people's house, but churches are doing it now. Things are happening. It's a different group. It's a different culture out there. I like the ideas about baby steps until we could think of something that is still friendly and safe.
Agree with that, Commissioner. And, there's more discussion to come. If you ultimately approve that, that's our tentative plan right now, but, different ideas may come up between now and then. And finally, under SPLOST facilities operating impacts, Leisure Services actually asked for twice as much as the $68,000. So if you think about it, we're constantly adding new SPLOST facilities that have to be kept up, new segments of trail where things have to be mowed, trash picked up, so on and so forth. As I said earlier, and I will talk shortly, I've tried to hold the line on new positions, but I went ahead and funded some of their operating needs to try and get that done. And just on a very high level, our staff capacity is sort of a stair step, right? We hire a new person, then we've got so much runway for new capacity, and then it fills up over time, then it's time to stair step again. And that's really the art of this, is working with staff to understand when we are at a critical moment and have to add new positions.
Yeah, I want to say on that too, on the SPLOST facilities, that to make it really clear that when the SPLOST Oversight Committee and when the commissioners vote on the slate of projects to put forward to the public, there are operating expenses. So it is our responsibility then to follow through and take care of them. I know sometimes people are like, oh, it's just so like trails. But we have invested a lot of money. There was upfront to begin with. There was a set, that we need to have the operation on here. Leisure Services, this is no sneak sort of thing added in at the end. So this was right there, right from the beginning. So I think it's really important that we do that, as well as addressing the state partnered agencies with the library and the public defender as well. Those are key roles in our community that we depend on. And we need to respectfully pay those people decent wages.
I have never been a Greenway Firefly Trail person. And because of all the other needs that are facing this community, that is more life and death issues. I'm not going to fight against this, but maybe when we vote on these projects that certain people don't get to advocate for, we should include maintenance and cleanup in that pot. But for me, general funds is another tax burden on folk who do not use the Greenway and the Firefly Trail. This was before my time, so I can't knock it, but I am, and I'm not going to fight this because they do need to be maintained. But until we start addressing issues in communities that have not been, but again, I needed to say that, yes, it's our responsibility, but next time, maybe we should incorporate that in those proposals.
Well, and certainly, this is where the commissioners, the duly elected representatives of the people, decide on what the funding priorities are. With regards to SPLOST, Commissioner, unfortunately, the way that SPLOST law is written, and it does not apply to transit now, but none of the SPLOST dollars can be used for maintenance or that type of thing. So they have to come from general fund dollars. And this is why when you go through the SPLOST and T-SPLOST process, there is an estimate of annual costs that are placed on it that goes into the thinking of what you can expect.
Well, again, maybe we should have thought about that years ago when we did Greenway and Firefly Trail, what kind of dollar it's going to cost the taxpayers who do not use these facilities.
Jesse?
Kind of the two-parter on this, maybe we can get an answer in the email follow-up.
Okay.
How does this figure compare to the estimates that were part of those SPLOST project proposals? And then also, I mean, you said this is half of what they've requested. So are we setting them up to be able to achieve what we would hope they would achieve in terms of maintenance of these facilities? Or we're really only getting halfway there and there's still going to be issues of litter and things taking a long time to get repaired and such?
Well, and you know, staff does an amazing job with what we give them. And part of this is y'all hire me to sort of interpret what the relative needs of some of the departments are. And, you know, if you were going for a very set mowing schedule, pickup schedule that we were being held to, then I would pay a lot more attention to it. As it stands now, their capacity to try and flex. What's really made it difficult, Commissioner, is just the vacancies that we have. So we can create another position, but we got to have the bodies to do the work. And that's the biggest enemy we're fighting now, as opposed to not having enough positions, is having the people to fill them.
And just, you know, being a facilities guy, anytime you build anything new, and all we like to do with the Firefly Trail is always going to be an upkeep cost in that. So I think as we move forward, if we're looking at building something in the future, then we need to recognize that that's going to be an upkeep cost in those things moving forward. So,
Well, it's my hope that one day, when we get to where we can estimate life cycle, Commissioner, to your point, that there would actually be a figure assigned to a new project and say it's going to cost us this much to keep it up over time, and this is how we plan to pay for it.
If the greenways and the Firefly Trails generated income some kind of way, and I'm not suggesting that would be a whole nother story for me, because it would go to the maintenance and maintaining. So it's not that I object to it, I'm just saying that, like Commissioner Fisher said that, you know, everything's a teachable moment. And as we move forward with anything that we develop, what are going to be the collateral costs later on? That's all I'm saying. But to just say, well, we built it and we're responsible, I'm just suggesting that in the future, we look at the other costs that will occur on taxpayers. That's all.
Agreed.
One of the things that's notable about trails, Savita, is that there's been a lot of analysis of the economic lift that happens when you have trail access in a community, two similarly situated communities, one with trails and one without. I can share some of that with you.
I just do want to reiterate, having served on two of those SPLOST committees, that there's actually a lot of discussion about the operating costs, and that the finance department and other departments present a lot of information. And I think there's a goal of limiting the operating expenses overall for the whole program. I mean, so that's one of the items that actually is discussed a whole lot. The reality is, on some of these SPLOST programs, like SPLOST 2011, we're just finishing projects that the commission was discussing a decade ago, and likewise, that's going to happen with things that we put on here. I mean, we have a lot of other new parks, and really these trails are just linear parks, and we have other new parks that have, and there, if you go look, there's operating expenses there. It's just that, you know, like everything, when it's off in the future, it's the future, but now we're here looking at it in the budget now, right? So,
well, even when we look at the trails with Virginia Walker, there's trails back there. If you go over there and look at those, the car tags of who's over there, they don't live in Clarke County. They're coming from everywhere. And I'm saying that you know, that's where I'm coming from. A lot of I'm good. I'm so good. Okay. And yes.
Well, the term for that, Commissioner, is called free riders. I mean, it is.
Okay.
That when you do facilities like that and you're a regional center, you're going to get a number of free riders, folks that don't contribute. But that is where I think some would argue that the sales tax comes
Right.
into play, that you're capturing because the old adage is 40% of the sales tax is generated by people from outside the community.
I understand.
Well, this operating impacts does not include life cycle. So for instance, we put, right now, we're replacing these failed culverts in our live stream replacement program. So previously corrugated metal with 25 to 30-year life expectancy with concrete, which should have 75 to 100-year. So what I'm not suggesting is that for the cost of that pipe, in year one of 75, we put away 1/75th of the cost, you know. So much like, let's talk about the Bishop Park pool, okay? That's got a life cycle. It's been in the ground since the 70s or 80s, and now it's come time to replace it, and y'all met that challenge with a SPLOST award. So what we want to avoid, though, as we, look at our capital budget, is huge swings in capital need each year, just depending on what's hitting the books, and that we try and normalize that a little bit where we're putting those funds out there.
That amortization schedule that
Yes.
John talked about earlier.
That's right. And, no, go ahead.
So, like, we've got a bunch of projects that we're voting on right now. I mean, do we need to kind of pump the brakes and look at some kind of replacement cost so we know what we're getting into? So we know what's going to happen next year?
Well, as far as the SPLOST projects are concerned, we're pretty much committed to those unless you want to go back to the voters and have them voted off the
No,
referendum.
I'm not trying to do that. I don't want to do that.
You're gonna get hung.
Most of those are SPLOST projects.
Yeah, most everything we're doing are SPLOST.
But, like, we've got a large volume of SPLOST projects, which is going to have a huge impact on the operating. So, but we don't have anything earmarked to increase the operating.
It comes up each year in the annual budget process. Because at first it's more of an estimate, and then when the project comes into more focus, we have a better idea of how to deal with it. And then that comes through in the form of departments that are having to service it with their annual request.
But when you pass a SPLOST project, are you saying it's got to be done by this year?
Well, no. Now, the commission does approve the tiering schedule, which sort of programs the money, but the projects are finished when they're finished. In fact, there's several, the water line projects that you're going to approve, I think have some 2011 money still in there.
That's my question, is should we slow down? Because I know we've got a lot of SPLOST stuff that we're, trying to get through. Should we slow down on that to where we can catch up with operating expenses?
Well, I don't think at this point, and with SPLOST 2020, which is the largest glut of projects that we're facing right now, they're all in design stages, site selection stages. So we're a ways away from having any operating impacts for those.
And really, the three largest of those are ballpark, $40 million for North Downtown, $32 million for the Classic Center, and about $78 million for the Judicial Center, along with renovation of the existing courthouse into a municipal facility. So those are the big chunks, and that is more than half of that, about $313 million approval from 2020. So you think of half of it being just three facilities or three projects.
Well,
The
just to-
Classic Center they incur their own operating
right.
expenses. Yeah.
Yes, and with Bethel, for instance, that's why, we had our eye on the ball with that when negotiating with the Housing Authority, and who's been an awesome partner for us. But for instance, there's a stormwater pond there that, at first we thought it might be a more regional stormwater pond to help development around the periphery of Bethel, but it ended up really just serving the development, and so we put the maintenance of that back on the partners. Now, there's a park there that we'll maintain, so when it comes up, we are trying to figure out what's fair and equitable. And with the benefit of time, Commissioners Hool and Myers, I think I understand now what you were asking about why we're still in expenditures. So the answer is no, the pay table adjustment does not get all of our positions up to 1560. I think the separation there, and we talked about it at the time, was, like 30% increases to get those minimum wage jobs that we had up to that 1560 level. And that's what we had suggested at the time. If you did the nuclear option of increasing, to get those up and rippling all the way through, it would be way too much money. So we're getting closer, but it doesn't get us to the minimums. But everybody, every human being working for us might not make less than $15.60 an hour.
Every human being is getting paid that.
But the positions aren't there yet because we haven't rectified the entire classification system.
So the 4%
Pay ranges.
the 4% market increase won't be applied to the folks who are currently making 1560?
Yes, every human being, if you approve 4%, every human being will make.
Every human being currently working here will get 1560.
They
So
no, they
every
will get
position-
4% more.
4% more, will get the 4% added to their 1560.
That's right.
So,
Pay tables, pay ranges.
The pay table is,
so all the people who aren't working for us yet, occupying the many vacancies we hope to fill, those positions that are currently listed as paying 1560, will those begin to be listed at 1560 plus 3%, or will
No.
those still just be listed at 1560? So new people in the door will come in at,
so let's just say, to use your example, I think from earlier, $14.20. If that's the minimum for a position, if you approve it as suggested, then that minimum
3%.
pay range would have 3% added to it. But because of the dictates of the commission, let's say that's a lifeguard,
yeah.
well, a full-time position. If it's a full-time position, then the person coming in would go straight to 1560. But there's already some separation between the person that was making 1560 because now they've got the 4% bump. So you don't have that compression there. Somebody might have been with us a year and they get the benefit of this increase. Somebody comes in right behind them, then there'll be some separation to avoid compression.
But
I think Commissioner Hool is addressing that we're still keeping our base floor level at the same area, so we're getting that, behind, that's not increasing
inflation.
with inflation. So like, I think I don't know if I did my math right. Like theoretically, if you added the 4% to that 1560, that would be another 62 cents. But I might have done the math wrong.
Well, let me do
Right.
this.
Yeah.
In our work session in 3 weeks, I'll have HR specifically address
Okay,
that.
good.
And
That would be-
I'll address it
I mean,
before
this
then.
is kind of a rehashing of what we went through last year. I feel like it's kind of the same conversation. And I guess, and that's when we went from 15 to 1560. And, I guess, my point here is if we're raising up, acknowledging the rising cost of everything, the wage table is going up for all positions. But these lowest paid positions that we, I think to use a term you'd used in the past, artificially raised up to 15 and then 1560, the table for those positions isn't practically being raised for the people coming in the door because those positions are still listed in our system below 1560.
So you're contemplating going to 1607?
1607, yeah. And then the people who are currently working for us are still going to get that 4 to 5%. So that still puts them above 1607. That puts them, north of that 16 and additional change. But
And similarly, those people who were making under 20 who were adjusted to 17 would be the 17 plus 3%.
yeah, but that's already happening because we've already adjusted those positions to 17, whereas there's these tiers of positions we haven't adjusted.
Well, the 1607, is that what the new,
That would be 3% of
Right.
1560. Yeah.
But is that the new,
We just consider that two different actions, which is where we've gone each of the past couple of years.
right.
The pay table adjustment is not the same as lower, as increasing the 1560. Because the pay rate.
I understand that, and that's,
I think we're all clear now.
okay, all right. Well, mentioned earlier about the real-time crime center, so, we had a generous gift from the university of $250,000 to help with our public safety cameras. So the RFP's out, there'll be an expansion of that camera system. We're cooperating with the university to share resources. And what we have is a number of video feeds. Nobody's, really monitoring them real time. And so one of the first steps towards maximizing that type of technology, and let me tell you, it has been awesome for us solving crime and understanding what's happened. And going the next step will actually increase safety for everyone, because what the software they're proposing that we pull together or that we acquire would pull together different video feeds and let officers be able to access what they need to. And then maybe there's a day when we actually do have a staff person who's monitoring real-time what's happening. And certainly that would help with situation awareness. If there's an event going on and officers are coming, they can actually see what's happening, or someone can tell them what's happening before they get there, as opposed to now you just sort of show up and figure it out for the most part. So that's one initiative there. Moving recycling costs from the landfill fund to the general fund. So Commissioner Thornton, I think you were making a good case for taxpayer equity a minute ago. So the landfill fund is supported by the tipping fees, okay? And the tipping fees have to go to cover the operations of the landfill. And if you don't know this about landfills, the post-closure requirements, when you close a cell of the landfill, there's, it's $1 million or more proposition. And then, of course, paying the debt service when we underwrite the opening of a new cell in the landfill. And so these are all things that we have not raised the tipping fee for years. We are suggesting that you do that this year. But at the same time, some of the things like the charm and education for recycling, which is for all the residents of Athens-Clarke County, but only so many residents are paying tipping fees. And so those had two cost centers that were kind of pulling on each other. And so we feel like there's taxpayer equity in moving this to the general fund, which the commission has agreed. And remember, if I told you we try and do things over several years to smooth the impact, this will be the final year of that. So you will not hopefully see another 350 next year.
Quick question here on this. I did watch the work session that I missed last week, but on the tipping fee, there was a discussion, and I think Commissioner Hull was like he was all for raising that up to whatever it was across the state, right? But I am not in the unified trash collection system at my house. So if the tipping fee was increased, that would be passed on, one would assume, to me through my curbside or whoever I'm using. Is that correct? Because that would affect what they're paying.
Well, the truthful answer to that is some of the haulers used our landfill and some do not.
Okay, if they used our landfill.
Yes.
Okay, and we don't, okay, that's all I need.
No, that's an excellent point, and you've actually illuminated something that everybody should know. So for instance, we do keep our cost centers pure, and so the residential collection, not for you, but for the folks that are in the old urban service district, the residential collection rates will also go up because the landfill charges us,
Okay.
Our residential customers have to pay tipping fees just like anybody else that uses the landfill. So if we're going up on the landfill costs, then our residential collection rates are going to go up as well.
Okay. I know this is off topic here, but is the solid waste Commissioner
Advisory
Davenport, are they looking at haulers for out the hauling? Are we going to be getting something eventually?
Yes, we are, we finalized sending it to the full merit commission, so it should be coming towards you with us fairly soon.
So we'll be getting work session.
Okay, great, wonderful. Big interest in that area, always. It's like the animal control.
I mentioned the firefighters for the ladder trucks and then the fire EMS captain. So let me tell y'all that we had over 60 positions, I think, requested, and I'm suggesting that 10 or so be approved, and 6 of them are one for ladder truck coverage, first of 3-year phase-in to get to where we need to get to there for the taller buildings. And then the EMS captain. So as you know, Chief Scarborough and our firefighters have been upping their game as it comes to EMTs and responding, being the first on the scene and stabilizing the patient, hopefully in certain cases before the ambulance gets there. And, I think someone said it best earlier, you just can't get there all in one year, but you continue to make progress. And so, our emergency medical dispatch, y'all have funded that, and that's coming online before too long. And this is really the next step that we take in trying to, do something that arguably anybody would be in support of, and that's improving our response time, safety net for our residents. So the pay plan, I mentioned that's just a $350 placeholder, $350,000 for that pay study in the new year. And then the space allocation study, and I know the property committee's been doing a lot of good work, but we're having to maybe rethink the judicial center from the original plan. Staff tells us with escalation that we only have enough money to build about 70% of what we think we need. And when I say space allocation plan, I'm not talking about going back a third time for the judicial folks. I'm talking about all the other folks that we were going to put in the old courthouse once the new courthouse was built and people got moved out. And I know the property committee has identified, there's a number of properties that we can either sell or repurpose perhaps. And we've got folks upstairs sitting on top of each other. And so we think a real thoughtful look at that would be good. There was some discussion in the last couple of days on the new community partnership program. And so what we formerly called independent agencies are really made up of 3 different types of agencies. One are some of our intergovernmental partners, and I would count the library, the health department, our public defender, and you saw in an earlier expenditure slide where the library and public defender had asked for some extra funds, and there's $200,000 in there for them. Then we have what I call children of the unified government, the Cultural and Affairs Commission, the Greenways Commission, the AIM Committee. And what we would suggest there, and most recently with the Cultural Affairs Commission, that those budgets be put line item into the department that's serving them. Because I think along the way, the advisory committees have gotten into actually dispersing funds, maybe even entering into contracts. That's not really their role. And so we want to rectify that in this year's budget. And then finally, I think this is what garners the most attention, is really some of the community service or community nonprofits that you tend to fund through this process. And what we're proposing is something akin to Savannah, the city of Savannah, Georgia's community partnership program. And this, Commissioner Thornton, kind of goes in line with what you made the other night. You said, I want to make youth development a priority. So for instance, and that is the same in Savannah, they just picked a number of community initiatives they wanted to, whether it's public safety or youth development or homelessness, or, you put those priorities out there in front of the public. You take the money, which is about $570,000 that you're giving to the current folks, and then you do an open invitation and let anybody apply for it, and then you decide who are those that get them at the end. Now, let me explain this. I am not suggesting that you don't fund the current folks this coming year. So this 570 is paying it forward. So what we're proposing, and we can get into it further, is that you go ahead and fund the independent agencies as you always have here, and that, the ones that have not asked for more money are going to be funded at their last year's amount. The library and public defenders asked for a good bit more. I've recommended $100,000 each for them in addition. But for our community service agencies in the coming year, y'all approve this amount of money, and then sometime later in the fall or perhaps into the year, we'll have a competitive application process. And this time next year, you would actually approve the awardees, right? And then that would give us time to put the contracts together so they could hit July 1st running for the next budget year. So you're kind of getting ahead for the next budget year for going forward.
So the 570 is for the people who came and spoke to us?
Well, the 570 is not for anybody in particular until you decide who that's for. But for the ones that came and spoke to us, that's already in the budget. But the next year, no funding is guaranteed for those community nonprofits that are currently funded, and they would compete like anybody else. Y'all would decide who gets the funds.
So okay, I get that. So is the budget already set then for those folks that came and speak, or can we add or take away?
You can add or take away.
Okay.
Anything that I'm talking about today, you can add or take away.
Okay.
And
Thank
this,
you.
and this does not include the library in this
The 570?
Yeah.
No, ma'am.
Okay.
Yeah, nor the health department.
Or North Health, okay,
Those kind of folks who are state agencies.
okay.
Can you get us like a one-pager on this? You know, there's so much that.
Yes,
Like,
yes.
because I think I spaced out from something you're saying and putting in the context. That would be
I
good
think that's
if
in
I could-
order.
Yeah.
Good point. And yeah, I had meant just to mention it today and then follow up with a memo.
Yeah.
And maybe even the Savannah example so you can see how that works in practice.
Yeah.
Okay. And then for your CDO that you ask about youth development, these would be ARPA fundings, I would suggest, but as the paper that you got Friday night helped to detail, we would expect if your desire is to open 2 community centers for year-round programming for kids, that those costs would be about $250,000 a year per center. And that is a number that's triangulated between the existing provider of such services, the Boys and Girls Club, and 2 of the Athens Housing Authority existing community centers, and then that's about the same number our staff came to if that's the route you wanted to go.
And that would also include then the centers that the local government operates. Does that come out of that 5K?
Well, no, good point, Commissioner. That 500,000 would be just for opening 2 unopened centers at this
Okay.
point.
Okay.
But there is a cost that goes with expanding our hours for existing leisure services facilities.
Mm-hmm.
And we understand that's what you told us to do, but if we're not seeing a great deal of utilization, and that could be because we're not doing something right, or I don't know. But at this point, we're at least putting this on there, and just like Commissioner Fisher asked, if you want to up that or down that, we can make that happen.
And just quick note on that, one of the formalities that we need to do is actually engage the housing authority, because those are their facilities, so we want to make sure that these facilities are in fact available and aren't being programmed in some other way. So it's one of the things that you'll see coming up.
Okay.
Okay, well, this is just a recap of what it looked like when all the requests came in the door. On the current budget to maintain existing service levels, there was $5 million asked for across all the departments. And operating budget requests increases were $8.4 million, which added 59 full-time positions. And then capital requests are at $26 million, so. All right, and then you got a score sheet there, if you will, to help keep up with that. Moving on to revenue and some of the questions y'all had on that. So property taxes do account for roughly 50% of our general fund revenues. And we, down from the last couple of years, but still, in my career, a generous number, a 10% increase in property values. Now, of course, there was a reduction in property tax revenues due to the new local homestead exemption. But after all of that, we believe that there's $4.5 million more that will be generated for property taxes, which makes up part of that $16 million that I just told you about.
Does that include the VRBO tax that we collect?
I don't believe so.
Wasn't that about $2 million?
No,
That includes some
$1 million?
local option sales tax, which goes into general operating, so there's.
hotel
9
motel tax.
Hotel, motel, and sales tax are charged to VRBOs or Airbnbs, short-term rentals.
Okay.
Just like a hotel.
So different from the property taxes. But the sales taxes, sales taxes continue to amaze. And so we're keeping what we've seen this past year. That's another extra $4 million for the budget as well.
Can I ask- Sorry, I keep asking the
no,
question.
no, you're
So
good.
sales tax increase, are we collecting all the tax that we should be collecting through Amazon? Because Amazon, it's point of sale. So is there a way to audit that?
Yeah, you're asking great questions, Commissioner. The Department of Revenue collects all sales taxes. So we don't really have a way to know. Now in Alabama, I think the local governments there successfully negotiated to become the collector of sales taxes, and so they can run a much more robust audit process. But right now, and that's something I think GMA has advocated for.
Yeah, there've been a number of years where cities have been interested in this, cities and counties have been interested in this question. And in fact, geez, as long ago as maybe 15 years ago, Hall County did an audit. They were able to successfully engage with Department of Revenue to sort of look purchase by purchase and line by line. And I think at that point, and again, this is in, say, circa 2010 numbers, they were leaving a couple $100,000 on the table. But Georgia just routes this through a single portal. I know when I talk to state senators and state representatives, and they, you know, obviously are directly engaging with these state departments, they do find Department of Revenue somewhat opaque. This is an opportunity for some advocacy when we talk to them.
We are generating, we are not able to audit it, is that?
Right.
That's right.
Yes.
And certainly, you know, I mean, it's of great benefit that the state General Assembly did provide to local governments a few years ago when they made sure that any online sales delivered to the doorstep, you know, accrue to that location or the doorstep. And so I think that's probably part of the reason for this increase we've seen. I mean, it's the reality, I think, in all our lives that, you know, as we go through year in, year out, we get sort of numbers stuck in our head. And for ages, I had $20 or $21 million as the kind of annual take of 1 penny of tax in my mind. And we're looking at 33.7. So, I mean, over the course of more than a decade, we've increased dramatically. And I think those online sales are a piece of that. God bless the kids across the street who have mommy and daddy's money, but whose sales tax pennies end up in this town.
Okay, all right. So other taxes, all other revenues, just so you see everything in front of you, that we've got some increases there, 1.3 million in other taxes, and all other revenues, a 3 million increase as well. And certainly, interest is one of those. So nobody likes higher interest rates, but I want to credit our finance staff with their cash management. And so we invest funds routinely to try and get what we can out of that. And we believe that the interest earnings that staff will generate will be around $3 million this coming year. Use of fund balance, I talked at length in the expenditure section, but I mentioned the 13 million and our best practice here and what they're going for. And then there's a revenue summary, and I'll ask any questions.
Any other questions? Summative? Is there anything that, just as you think about the overall budget, you just want us to be thinking about openly? Obviously, Commissioner Fisher mentioned the kind of wage scale and compensation plan earlier.
No, I was just curious, from a revenue, y'all might say the way I stepped out, but from a revenue standpoint, are we ahead of where we were last year for what we expect to take in, or where you think we are?
Well, it's interesting because if you remember, 50% of approximately 50% of our revenues are property taxes, and they tend to come all at one time. So at a point in time in the year, we're way ahead of revenue, and then we slowly catch up because it's a seasonal injection. Is that fair, Chris?
Yes.
David?
Okay.
So I would say that based on the sales tax note, our sales taxes are ahead of what we projected for sure.
And of course, the other sort of multi-year impact that we see is that when we've got a package like a SPLOST or a T-SPLOST that's got a defined dollar figure on it, when we hit, say for SPLOST, that $313 million, you know, then we need to have gone back to referendum to the public so that we can begin the next package. And when we're collecting sales taxes to the degree that, you know, we've just discussed, those programs that are existing right now are going to sunset earlier than anticipated. And so I think in this term, I'll be able to help prep another T-SPLOST at the very least.
Yeah, certainly a T-SPLOST will be on us before you know it. I think the current projected sunset for the 2020 SPLOST is 2032, which would mean, you know,
I'll be in a wheelchair.
That's 2 more terms.
I'm already in a wheelchair. As we approach another T-SPLOST, which my first one was 4 years ago, 4 years ago, are we going to get to discuss a opportunity to change how we do T-SPLOST? Or do we do it just the way we did it last year? Is there an opportunity to look at, and my concern goes back to making sure everybody gets something out of the pot. And I just felt that I felt a little bit like I had to work too hard to get stuff in my district. But is there a way that we can talk about the process that is more equitable in the future?
Well, and you're talking about how projects are identified, brought to the table, and approved.
No, some set rules to make sure every district gets something, whatever that is. Because I just feel like with that first T-SPLOST, was that the first one or the second one?
We're now in the second.
Okay.
2018 and 2023.
Okay.
23 1 year.
I just feel, all right, for example, I don't think that certain districts got money from SPLOST. That's what I'm trying to say. And I would like to make sure there's some kind of caveat that assures that every district gets something out of T-SPLOST and SPLOST in the future, but it'll be a while before we do SPLOST again. So I'm talking about the process.
That's up to you and your peers on that. I know the capital project delivery system was mayor and commission approved. I suspect that the way that we go about with the Citizens Advisory Committee is also a policy of the commission, but I'm not sure. But certainly, if the commission wants to change that, they can.
We're probably about 2 years out from that process beginning, and so we can certainly have a conversation.
Okay, thank you.
In the lead up to that.
Yeah, and on that, I'd say that if I remember correctly, from the last time, the stuff always happens sooner than we expect. And then it's like, oh, there's no, like, it's right now, it's June, we have to put that committee together by July. So whenever that is, we need to make sure that we have that discussion, which I think is a good discussion to have, because the process hasn't been reviewed. No matter, we'll see where we go with it. But that would need to be happening that 5 months, 6 months before we start that process. I'd be remiss on this because I think every time I listen to Commissioner Hamby, he's always asking for like a list of all the positions that were requested on that. And I know last year as Mayor Pro Tem, I saw the budget earlier, and I can't really remember there's so many different versions of that budget, but I know in the final budget, do we actually see, like for the police department, because I brought this up a lot, in defense of the police department, in defense of our support of the police department, in how many of the capital requests were asked for and granted. And so we saw that in the final in the final budget, what was requested and what was funded. Is that correct, that comes through in the final budget? Or was that just in preliminary budgets?
I think it was in preliminary. I don't think that's a part of the final budget.
It's not part of the final budget
All right,
book.
right, because I think that is helpful to know. I know, again, with the police department, when people are quick to put forth the idea that characterize, that's a good word, as are not being supportive of the police department, it's very handy to say, wait a second, they requested 16 capital expenses and 15 of them were funded, which is more than most departments. I thought that was very helpful to have. So perhaps we could get some kind of data like that as well.
Sure, thank you.
Looking at some of these expenditures, like the space allocation study and the pay plan, are any of those things, are ARPA funds eligible to be used for those?
Yes. Now, what we're proposing, because the commission had allocated all the ARPA funds for other purposes, that that you use some of that one-time fund balance to fund these one-time, so to speak.
Okay.
So the pay plan and the space allocation study, those will be coming from that $11 million of the fund balance that I'm proposing, along with augmenting some of the capital requests.
And Blaine, this would feature about $900,000 of ARPA dollars through what the federal government would define as this conversion process, where you can use those ARPA dollars for general operating funds if you featured some loss within the kind of first couple of years of the COVID pandemic. So some ARPA dollars are baked in to the tune of about $900,000.
But what it's called, Commissioner, is revenue replacement. And so there was an equation that the government, when they distributed the ARPA funds, that was meant to try and, hold up some local governments who lost a lot of revenue through the downturn with the COVID. And we did some calculations, and based on the revenue that was lost, you could have used most of the ARPA funds, the $57 million, towards revenue replacement, but the commission decided that they wanted to advance these other initiatives.
Jesse?
Yeah, I wanted to ask about the homestead exemption. Do we have an estimate on what the impacts on that? I didn't see that. Not the, we know the increase from the flat homestead exemption from 10 to 25, but the floating homestead exemption, the low-income homestead exemption, do we have an estimate on the impact of that?
I don't, but we can find out.
Is that something that we are able to estimate, or are we just kind of unable to until we get through a year of seeing how many people?
My guess is that we probably have to have the on-the-ground experience. I know in the first week or two, the tax commissioner noted to me that we just had very little foot traffic, and they're doing sort of one-on-one meetings with folks who are applicants for that. So by all means, there's a page of public information put together on our website, and so if you haven't already, push that out to your constituents so they know that that's available to them.
So, yeah, I guess if anybody happens to be watching this meeting, we have an additional homestead exemption on the books besides the one everyone's aware of that takes things from 10 to 25. And if you qualify as low income as defined in that ordinance, which is 200% of the federal poverty level, so fixed income seniors, for example, are likely to qualify, then you get your property value frozen at the current year. So that's something that I think we're hoping some residents will exercise, and I guess I look forward to seeing what the impacts on that'll be. But do we have a sense, financially speaking, of like whether we're going to be able to absorb that easily, or whether there's the potential for us to learn 6 months from now that that's a heavy disruption on our anticipated revenue?
You've got it in here. It
Well,
says-
that's the,
It says a $3 million reduction in property.
That's the flat increase for everyone from 10 to 25,000, but there's an additional.
Oh, okay, yeah, the other one, yeah.
There's an additional homestead exemption that's a freeze on taxes for people who are low income.
I would imagine there's sort of a built-in governor on that, as people have to come in and register, and maybe the word takes a while to get out. So I agree with what the mayor said. We just need to track the experience and see what that cumulative effect is. Well, process-wise, y'all, this is sort of the demarcation point of where I hand the budget over to the mayor. Of course, we'll meet several times and go through, and he'll ask, and challenge, some of the assumptions we've made here. And from this point forward, Mayor, you'll be working with the commissioners to hear their concerns, and your budget will be due in approximately 30 or 40 days.
One of the requests, kind of piggybacking on or maybe clarifying Commissioner Meyer's request. Each year we've kind of been through the list of comparing the capital project requests to what's funded. Can we also get the same for operating expenses and salaries, or new positions rather? Yeah. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. All right, thank you all.
All right, we will gather in a big 3 minutes if anyone wants to go take a quick break before our next segment.